I'll be back.
Join me as we travel back in time to a fateful night in 1984 in a dark alleyway in Los Angeles. Do you remember that spine-chilling sensation when the T-800 stepped out from the wreckage, eyes glowing a menacing red? We held our breath through every chase, only to realise with a shock that the fate of humanity rested in the hands of a simple waitress. But behind this masterpiece lies a treasury of scorching secrets. Would you believe a madman director let his leading man wander the streets with a face full of exposed wires just to save a few bucks? Or that the crew nearly lost their lunch because the makeup looked too disturbingly real? And here is the most dangerous part. A secret ending was terminated right on the editing table, one that, if kept, might have steered cinematic history in a completely different direction. Let's set aside our real-world AI anxieties for a moment and peel back the chilling mysteries of the most daredevil production of the 20th century. 20. Arnold Schwarzenegger and the hair fire that almost became a disaster. In the iconic scene where the T-800 emerges from the burning wreckage of a truck, Arnold's expression is cold and terrifying. Audiences thought it was peak acting, but in reality, Arnold was simply trying his best to maintain his composure amidst suffocating heat. Here's the secret: the fire on set was 100% real. Due to a mishap in effects control, a blast of flame splashed directly onto Arnold's face. As a result, his eyebrows and a portion of his hair were instantly singed to a crisp. If you look closely at the subsequent frames, Arnold's appearance looks quite odd because his famous eyebrows are gone. To keep the hunt going, the makeup team had to use eyeliner to literally draw his face back on. It turns out even an assassin from the future is no match for a fail by the special effects department. 19. The creep on the streets of LA. Because the budget for the first film was extremely tight, James Cameron had to resort to guerrilla filmmaking, shooting on public streets without official permits or police assistance. But here's the kicker. One night, Arnold Schwarzenegger, decked out in dramatic wound makeup with electric detonators in his eyes to create that red glow, wandered openly through the streets of Los Angeles to hit his mark. A few locals passing by were absolutely terrified, thinking they were facing a sinister character straight out of a horror movie. They even tried to contact the police, and Arnold was nearly hauled away to the station for questioning if the crew hadn't made a hasty retreat. The sheer panic on the faces of those bystanders? That was 100% genuine. 18. The robot eye effect from dental tools. The scene where the T-800 performs maintenance on its own face in the bathroom to realign its eye remains one of the most haunting sequences in cinema. To achieve this level of realism, the effects team had to craft a silicone bust that was a dead ringer for Arnold. To make the robotic eye move in that bone-chilling way, technicians used specialized dental tools to manipulate the interior of the model. The friction between metal and silicone produced a series of mechanical squelching sounds that added a layer of visceral tension. In post-production, they cranked up the volume of these sounds to create an auditory effect that makes your skin crawl. This level of detail was so disturbing that even the crew members felt a bit queasy because the model looked and sounded far too human. 17. The original ending could have been much more abrupt. Think back to the image of Sarah Connor in her Jeep, looking toward the dark, ominous clouds as the gas station boy says, "There's a storm coming." Sarah replies cryptically, "I know." It's a poetic ending filled with both dread and hope. However, the studio executives back then weren't exactly fans of poetry. They pressured James Cameron to roll the credits the moment the machine was crushed in the hydraulic press. They wanted a quick, "Bam! Villain's gone! Movie's over!" kind of finish to save on production costs. Cameron fought tooth and nail to keep the scene of Sarah driving into the storm. He argued that without it, the film would just be a generic B-movie about a monster being destroyed. Furthermore, in the original draft, Cameron wanted Sarah to wear a wedding ring to symbolise her love for Kyle Reese, but he scrapped it. Why? Because he wanted Sarah Connor to be a fiercely independent mother, defined by no man. This created an early icon of female empowerment. Sarah didn't need a marriage certificate. She just needed her resilience and the child growing inside her to face a turbulent future. A chemical feast on Arnold's body. Remember the scene where the T-800's flesh is burned away, revealing the gleaming metal endoskeleton? To create the effect of smoke billowing off the machine as if it had just stepped out of an oven, the crew used a method that was, let's just say, highly unconventional. In 1984, CGI was a luxury they couldn't afford, so they applied specialised chemical smoking compounds directly onto the metal frame. The problem? This smoke was quite pungent and irritating at close range. Every time the director yelled "Action!", Arnold and the crew had to hold their breath to avoid inhaling the thick fumes rising right under their noses. There were moments when these compounds reacted with the makeup, causing Arnold's skin to break out in irritation. It was a scorching price to pay, literally, to create a cinematic legend. The truth behind the iconic arm surgery. The shot of the T-800 repairing its arm, revealing hydraulic pistons moving beneath the surface, is one of the most memorable, cringe moments in film history. But don't be fooled by the rumours. The reality is much more fascinating. To pull this off, makeup wizard Stan Winston created a prosthetic arm so sophisticated it was breathtaking. Instead of using organic materials that would rot and smell, they used high-grade silicone and soft resins to perfectly mimic human tissue. To create that visceral look, they used a mixture of corn syrup, food colouring, and a special polymer. Under the hot studio lights, this concoction became eerily sticky and glossy, making the crew on set shudder at how realistic it appeared. Moreover, this arm was entirely low-tech. 2 or 3 technicians had to huddle under the table, manually pulling cables inside the model to sync the finger movements with Arnold's actions on screen. Skynet wasn't created by a human genius. We all remember the T-800's menacing radar sweeps and how Skynet is described as a godlike superintelligence. You'd think it was designed by a council of the world's greatest minds, but the truth is a bit more circular. As it turns out, Skynet wasn't born from human brilliance. It exists thanks to a massive narcissistic loop. Skynet sends its soldier to the past to wipe out humanity, but that soldier gets crushed into scrap metal. Humans then find that scrap metal, study it, and use it to build Skynet. This is the bootstrap paradox. Essentially, Skynet gave birth to itself by borrowing its own future technology. In other words, if the Terminator hadn't failed in the first movie, Skynet would never have been conceived. James Cameron cut the scene explaining this because he wanted the audience to focus on the tragic romance of Kyle Reese. If he'd kept it in, we'd be too busy having a headache over time travel logic to cry. 30. The first secret version of John Connor. Have you ever wondered how John Connor could send his own biological father back in time before he was even born? The answer lies in a shocking hypothesis, the Alpha Timeline Theory. In the original timeline, Sarah Connor never met Kyle Reese. Instead, she got a bit too close with Stan Morsky, the failed date who stood her up at the beginning of the movie. The child born from this bland affair was the actual original John Connor. This Alpha John grew up, led the resistance against the machines, and came up with the idea to send Kyle Reese back to 1984 to protect his mother. But ironically, Kyle went to the past and, completely took Stan Morsky's place in Sarah's heart. The result? A new John Connor was born with Kyle Reese's DNA, while poor Alpha John was suddenly erased from existence because his DNA had been replaced. In other words, the John Connor we love is actually a replacement version who accidentally wiped out the very founder of the Resistance. 12. The horrific secret behind Kyle Reese's panicked expression. Do you remember the panicked face, the sweat-drenched skin, and the paranoid eyes of Kyle Reese when he first landed in that dark alley of 1984? In reality, that terror didn't just come from the future. It came from a comrade who vanished right before his eyes. In James Cameron's original 1982 draft, Kyle Reese didn't travel alone. John Connor actually sent an additional elite soldier named Sumner to accompany Kyle on the mission to protect Sarah. But while Kyle landed safely, Sumner went to heaven, literally. Due to a coordinate error, he materialized exactly where a steel fire escape was located. As a result, Sumner's body and the steel structure were fused together. This death ended Sumner's journey, leaving Kyle all alone in the past. This is the reason why throughout the movie, Kyle Reese looks like a mental patient, jumping at every small sound and acting like a cornered animal. 11. The Terminator's original name. Recall that iconic scene when the cyborg walks into the police station and asks to see Sarah Connor. The term T-800 pops into our heads as a natural reflex, much like the way we call out the name of an iPhone or a famous car line. But here is the truth. The term T-800 never appeared in the original film. Throughout the entire journey of hunting Sarah Connor, this muscular assassin was only known by a name that sounds very corporate: Cyberdyne Systems Model 101. In fact, in the Terminator universe, T-800 is the name of the internal metal endoskeleton. As for Model 101, that is the external skin. In other words, Model 101 is the appearance of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Additionally, James Cameron choosing the number 101 was a hidden pun. In English, 101 is often used to refer to the most basic, introductory level of something. 10. A disastrous combination from the authors themselves. If you are a true film geek, you will recognize a valuable detail when Bishop introduces himself. I am a Hyperdyne Systems 12A2 model. Sound familiar? Hyperdyne is a direct play on words from Cyberdyne, the corporation that accidentally created Skynet. Initially, this was just an Easter egg that James Cameron used to tease the audience. But things started to get out of control when the comic book authors at Dark Horse decided to go big in the year 2000. They revealed the truth. Skynet did not die after its defeat in 2032. It turns out this AI was a true hidden master, as it had been secretly lurking in computer networks for hundreds of years. And that opportunity arrived in the year 203,081, when the Weyland-Yutani Corporation dug up this pile of ancient Terminator technology. Instead of putting it in an exhibition, they had the craziest idea in history: merging Terminator hardware with xenomorph DNA to create a new race called the New Breed. Imagine a Terminator with a metal frame, but with a long head and razor-sharp teeth. This is truly a disastrous combination that both Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley would certainly refuse to understand. 9. The famous line, "I'll be back," was almost cancelled. Recall the moment at the police station when the assassin is refused entry to see Sarah Connor by the staff. He quietly observes, then drops a short sentence,
"I'll be back."
Just seconds later, he drives a whole car through the wall, turning that promise into a horrific battle. The truth is, Arnold Schwarzenegger absolutely hated that line.
I will be back. And I thought this was going to go right by, and he would say,
who
yeah,
cares?
say whatever you want,
Yeah.
Instead of saying, "I'll be back," he had a heated argument with director James Cameron to be allowed to say the full version. "I will be back." Arnold gave a very technical reason. An intelligent machine should speak formally and should not use human contractions. Additionally, with his thick Austrian accent, pronouncing the word "I'll" was a challenge. He felt his tongue got all twisted every time he had to utter that syllable in front of the camera. However, James Cameron flatly refused. He basically told Arnold, "Just say it exactly like that for me." And so Arnold had to struggle through it. The result? The line that Arnold detested became the most famous quote in cinematic history. 8. Why does Skynet fear the T-1000? You surely remember the horror of witnessing the T-1000 in Part 2, right? It was a being that could walk through bars and recover its body in just a few seconds. But if it had such a high-tech weapon, why didn't Skynet send him back to 1984 from the start to be safe? A very popular theory in the fan community reveals that the T-1000 was actually a prototype with an excessively high level of independence. It wasn't just a machine, it also had the ability to think for itself, adapt, and make decisions based on the actual situation. Skynet worried that if it released a talented but troublesome guy like the T-1000, he would sooner or later develop his own goals. Who knows, after fighting Sarah Connor, the T-1000 might find being the master of the world more interesting than working for a main server. So Skynet decided to stay loyal to the old T-800 model for peace of mind. Though a bit slow, it was do as told, never talking back. However, by the time of Part 2, when John Connor's resistance reached the very mouth of its cave, it had no choice but to play its final card. In desperation, I think Skynet probably shrugged its shoulders. Whatever, just send this guy. Whether he betrays us or not, we'll worry about later. If we don't destroy John Connor now, we're finished. 7. Sting and the fear of flying fish. Recall the image of Kyle Reese, the man who travelled through time without a single stitch of clothing on his body. Michael Byrne did an excellent job portraying the look of a post-apocalyptic survivor. However, in James Cameron's original imagination, this hero was supposed to have a more artistic and romantic style. The number one candidate that James Cameron craved for the role of Kyle Reese was the famous singer Sting, lead singer of The Police. He believed this was the face of a soldier who had spent his whole life fighting in dark underground tunnels. However, Sting shook his head because at that time, the only work Cameron had directed was Piranha 2, The Spawning, a low-budget horror movie about flying piranhas. Yes, you heard that right, flying fish. For a star, he feared that the Terminator would also just be a cheap B-movie. Sting's refusal unintentionally opened the door for Michael Biehn, giving us a Kyle Reese full of internal strength and authenticity. And James Cameron? He proved to the whole world, never judge a director by his flying fish. Perhaps later, when he saw the Terminator become a global legend, Sting had to mutter to himself, "I'll be back." 6. The credit scandal, when a thank you is actually a penalty. Have you ever stayed in the theatre to watch all the credits scrolling at the end of a movie? Usually, that is the place for the director to send thanks to the crew. However, in The Terminator, there is a line of text that appears so out of place it's strange. Acknowledgement to the works of Harlan Ellison. Recall the original plot that made James Cameron's name. A soldier travels through time to the present to stop a disaster and confront an arch nemesis. We thought this was a pure product of Cameron's nightmares. But Ellison claimed that Cameron borrowed ideas from 2 episodes he wrote for the Outer Limits series in the 1960s. One episode was about 2 warriors travelling through a time portal. The other was about a robot hiding in human skin. And when the movie was released, boom, Ellison flew into a rage and decided to take the case to court. Instead of prolonging the legal battle, Orion Pictures chose the peacemaking option. They agreed to pay a large sum of money to keep Ellison quiet, and most importantly, they had to carve his name into every print of the film forever. It was truly a laughing through tears situation for James Cameron. He always insisted he thought of it all himself, but in the end, he still had to watch the name of the man who sued him appear at the end of the film like an uninvited guest. 5. The movie's connection to the Matrix. Recall the atmosphere of the future year 2029 in the Terminator, where flying machines fill the sky and humans live in ruined underground bunkers. Then look at the world of the Matrix, where humans are also dominated by machines but are trapped in pods. There is a hypothesis that these two masterpieces are two chapters of the same dark history. According to this, the Terminator is the early stage of the war, and the Matrix? That is the bitter end when the machines have completely won. They realized that destroying humans was too wasteful, so they switched to using us as rechargeable batteries. But the most interesting thing is that the evidence for this hypothesis is not in the movies, but in a real-life courtroom. A writer named Sophia Stewart once caused a shock when she sued both of these cinematic empires. She claimed that both the Terminator and the Matrix were reheated from her manuscript titled The Third Eye, written in 1981. If this is true, then John Connor is the predecessor of Neo, and Skynet's loss in Part 2 was just a trick so it could evolve into the more sophisticated Source in the Matrix. It turns out, even if you destroy a T-800, you still run the risk of waking up in a pod with a bunch of wires plugged into the back of your neck. 4. One word from Arnold is equivalent to $7,500. In the entire movie, Arnold's T-800 character has only a mere 17 lines of dialogue. If you gather everything he said from the beginning to the end of the movie, we would have a list of fewer than 100 words. This wasn't because Arnold was too lazy to learn his lines, but a very profound calculation by James Cameron. He wanted to turn the cyborg into a cold-blooded killer who only needs to act, not talk. And here is the most interesting part. Arnold's salary for this role was $750,000. If you do a simple division for every word that came out of his mouth, Arnold pocketed approximately $7,500. Imagine saying the phrase, "I'll be back," and boom, you immediately have a brand new car. While other actors have to cry or read long dialogues, Arnold only needs to stand there, keep a cold face, and occasionally drop a few words for the money to keep flowing into his account. 3. The secret mode that made the Terminator too smart. Recall those spine-chilling moments when the 1984 assassin showed his cunning. He knew how to stand in front of a mirror to fix his appearance, he swore, and the climax was the performance of mimicking Sarah Connor's mother's voice. That wasn't a standard feature. In fact, this T-800 might have enjoyed a privilege that Skynet was never supposed to allow. In the special edition of Part 2, a secret was revealed. Skynet is extremely terrified of its own creations. Therefore, every Terminator unit, when going on a solo mission, is set to read-only mode. The purpose is to keep them absolutely loyal, only following orders and not being allowed to think too much and develop their own will. So why did the 1984 T-800 look so smart? It wasn't until John Connor in Part 2 performed an operation on the T-800 protecting him, flipping a physical switch on the chip to learning mode, that a Terminator truly began to feel, began to ask the question, why do humans cry? And developed a personality. A top student, but without a heart. That is the true obsession. 2. Arnold Schwarzenegger could have not been the Terminator. Recall the face of Arnold Schwarzenegger when playing the Terminator. a face as hard as stone, eyes without a hint of emotion, and an appearance that even terrified me. But can you believe it? That cyborg position almost belonged to one of the most beloved sports stars in America at that time, O.J. Simpson. In the early 80s, O.J. Simpson was not only a football legend, but also a national advertising face with a friendly image. Because of this fame, a studio executive proposed him for the role of the T-800, believing that O.J. would draw audiences to the theatre. But James Cameron flatly rejected it because he believed O.J. Simpson looked too likeable. They feared the audience wouldn't believe a person like that could transform into a machine. And the funny thing is this, 10 years later, in 1994, O.J. Simpson's nice guy image completely collapsed after a world-shaking legal scandal. It turns out James Cameron was right about the casting, but completely wrong about evaluating O.J.'s gentleness. If O.J. had been chosen back then, perhaps the Terminator would have become a prophetic movie, and this cinematic empire might have vanished due to the real-life scandals of the lead actor. 1. Soundtrack from a cast-iron skillet in the kitchen. Close your eyes and listen to the legendary melody. And a dry, steely sound. Hearing it feels like the footsteps of a metal giant and like the frantic heartbeat of prey being hunted. But in reality, this haunting movie score was created by a cast-iron frying pan. Musician Brad Fiedel, while struggling to find a sound that was both mechanical and sounded truly deadly, ran straight into the kitchen and pulled out a skillet. He struck the pan directly and recorded that clanging, harsh sound. It didn't stop there. While recording, Fiedel hit the rhythm slightly off, making the music sound a bit out of tune. However, instead of deleting and re-recording, he suddenly realized that very mismatched, imperfect rhythm created a feeling of extreme restlessness and anxiety. Ultimately, whether it was the eyebrow-singeing accidents on set, the guerrilla shots in the middle of the night in Los Angeles, or the secrets of the chip locked tight in an electronic brain, the Terminator 1984 still stands firm as an immortal monument. What do you think about these hidden corners of the T-800? After knowing about the cast iron pan or the slimy silicone layers, do you want to binge watch this masterpiece again? Do you want me to continue exposing the secrets of another masterpiece? Comment down below.